Morena, good morning. I got your attention, that's excellent. My name is Alireza Turani-Rad. I am the Deputy Dean of Faculty of Business, Economics and Law. And I would like to welcome you all today to this beautiful building, which was opened only a couple of months ago by our Prime Minister. This is our engineering building, and it is built in a very sustainable manner, and we are very, very proud of that. And today we are really delighted to jointly organize this event with the Center for Social Impact. Social impact is very, very close to our heart at AUT Business School. We started about just over 2 years ago to redesign our curriculum. And the whole idea then was to move away from one direction in business. I'm a finance professor, I'm going to use finance as an example, being just pure finance analysts, to give a broader experience and flavor to our curriculum, that our students can not only specialize in finance, but also see other disciplines within our faculty and also wider university. So we have introduced a number of multidisciplinarity in our business school, and we encourage our students not only study business, but also go outside, come to the engineering, go to law, go to culture. So as such, they get a wider experience, because that's what we felt the society needs and what industry is requiring from our future generation students. So quite interestingly, when we started discussing about redesigning our curriculum, this theme of social impact was somehow there, and everybody bought into it very, very easily and accepted it as a sort of guiding principle for our curriculum at business school. So we started with our undergraduate curriculum, and this social impact is really embedded practically in all our courses, in all our papers. And it's not only in teaching. Many of our colleagues and researchers, they have been doing studies on social impact. And as recently as last year, we also, for example, opened up a new research cluster in social impact, especially in accounting department. So it's not only in teaching, also in research. We are very much involved in this topic of social impact. And I was just talking to a gentleman who was interested in valuation of social housing. And we would love to, some of you who are here and are involved in this social impact in your businesses, to come and talk to us. More than happy to get engaged, and you can use our expertise for purposes related to social impact, and more than happy to put you in contact with the right people in our business school who are doing those type of research. So in all our activities, in teaching, in our research, and in our engagement with the society and industry and corporations, this topic of social impact is really ahead of us and is our guiding principles. And today, again, we are very happy to organize this joint event, and I'm sure all of you are going to enjoy the presentation by MJ, and especially the discussions afterwards. And there are many of our colleagues here that I'm sure we're going to take many of these concepts back to our business school and incorporate them in our teaching, in our research, and engagement. Thank you very much.
Morena, kia ora koutou. My name is Alison Taylor. I'm the Chief Executive of the Centre for Social Impact, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with all of you. I want to firstly thank that lovely welcome and AUT for collaborating with us. We've been talking for some time about how we might do things together, and this seemed like a fantastic opportunity, and it's wonderful to be here in this beautiful building. I also want to thank Foundation North, who are our funding partner and supporter. in this, which is the second in a series, which we've called our Social Impact Series. So just to acknowledge Chloe and the team from Foundation North and the work that they do in investing in social change and social impact across Auckland and Northland as the largest philanthropic in New Zealand. So we really value this concept of collaboration, and it's what's underpinned our thinking for this new series of creative conversations, how we can bring together different groups of people, different types of entities to think about what we're all doing and what we're learning and what we might do together to enable greater social impact and societal change in the work that we do. It's wonderful to know that AUT is moving into this space, and I'm sure there'll be many discussions around the tables. I know there's many of you from the business school, which is fantastic, as well as from our grantee partners, funders, businesses. There's a whole mix of people. We're really delighted for this second in our series, and if you want to have a look at the publication from the first ones on our website, to introduce MJ Kaplan, who's a collaborative associate of ours, a long-time friend and partner, and who's been on the journey with us for the last 5 years as we've set up the centre and been working out how to grow our network and our work. And we're 5 years old now, and very pleased to have been able to experiment and innovate. And MJ happened to be here on her Ian Axford Fellowship for a year when we were starting up, and it was a beautiful connection into the work that she had been doing in the States around social enterprise and network development. And she has such wisdom to share that we were just delighted to be able to offer this opportunity today. So what we'll do is I'm going to introduce MJ, and she's going to share some of her ideas with us, and then we're going to go into table conversations because we really want to garner all of your collective wisdom, and then we will pull all of that together into a publication from today's event, which you will all get, and feel free to share, because the idea is that we're sort of influencing others and their thinking as well. So that's what our intent is, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome MJ to the stage.
Kia ora koutou. It's just such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Alison. It really has been a great journey for 5 years, and I'm so grateful to your support and the foundations who supported me 5 years ago when I was here on my fellowship, but again, to step back and reflect on these past 5 years and themes moving forward. I also want to say how exciting it is to be at AUT. I was here a number of times during the fellowship, and I'm always impressed the questions. You're asking the tough questions here. And I stepped into academia around the time that I came for my fellowship. I'm a practitioner at heart, but I really appreciate the partnership. I think it really strengthens practice and research when we're working together to ask the right questions and to learn to really pursue thorough research and data to understand what's real and where we need to go. So thank you very much. So just, I did want to share a little bit about me so you have a sense where I'm coming from. As Alison said, I had an Ian Axford Fellowship 5 years ago, and I was based at the Ministry of Social Development in the youth development area. And actually, I focused my research on the youth pipeline in social enterprise at the time because I was quite involved in the States with social enterprise growing in higher education. And I was surprised to find that there was very little formal work going on here. Lots of activity by the students, lots of energy, but I believe there wasn't a single paper in undergraduate at the time 5 years ago. And so I was interested to understand that and broadly how that fit into the ecosystem. And so what I found overall in my look at the field here was that social enterprise was really hiding under the table, that there was lots of activity going on, but it wasn't being given form and it wasn't well understood. And so hopefully my work and the work of many others began to give shape to the good work that was going on, and I think that has led to a great deal of momentum. So that was my background, and I was really fortunate. I connected with one of the ventures that I researched, Lumio, which is an app for collaborative decision-making, and we really hit it off. I was very enthusiastic about the tool because I think collaborating is difficult mostly not because of a lack of intent, but actually just the difficulty of connecting across time and space. So I thought a tool that enables that is really fantastic. My good fortune was that that team invited me to continue to work with them, and I had an opportunity to join the team, and I've come back a couple of times each year. So that's afforded me the chance to just stay connected and also to continue to notice what's changing in the country. I'm currently working in a consulting role, and I'm working around adaptive organization, just seeing really that the entire context of organizations, whether it's business, higher ed, foundations, government, we're all operating in a really, really different environment where the pace of change is just accelerating almost on a weekly basis. A lot of surprises that you can't anticipate. So figuring out how to be much more adaptive is just critical. And we're frankly operating in a hierarchical system that was designed for the industrial age. So I've stepped into working with a consultancy that's looking to blow that up pretty much and find new adaptive models to help people to do better, faster work, whatever the context, whether it's a government context, a business context, it really doesn't matter. So that's just a little bit background about me. If for those of you who had a chance to read the paper, you can see that I come from lots of different angles. So I'm trying to use those different perspectives to step back and think about what matters. So when I think of social impact here in New Zealand, as well as across the world, I think about the fact that we're living the result of what we've created. And I think we need to be able to step back and understand what is it that we've created. And I think the most glaring and obvious and alarming area is climate change, that we have understood about climate change for, a good 25 years. We continue to operate to create systems that are fueling the problem, pun intended, and are leading us to this very untenable situation. So the same, I think, is true with capitalism and business, that we've designed business really to focus on profit maximization and growth at all costs. And that's historically, that's really not how we thought about business. Certainly, you have deep roots here from Maori traditions that forever have understood business and markets to be in service to stronger, healthier community. But even in the US, for decades, we understood that business was deeply embedded in community and that paid attention and was engaged with the multiple stakeholders, whether it be employees, consumers, neighbors, other stakeholders in the community. So I think we have to step back and think about how have we designed the individual institutions and the broader systems, and are they in service to what we believe we need? So from a social enterprise stand, I believe that social enterprise is just really stepping in as a market correction to the fact that business has fixated sort of out of control and stepped away from being in service to those multiple stakeholders. And I don't think social enterprise is the answer. And I say that as someone who teaches social enterprise and who works for a social enterprise. But what I mean by that is simply that I think we really need to step back and think about business more broadly and the role that business overall is playing in the community, and think about how we can reshape business to be more balanced and in service to triple bottom line. I think that increasingly equity has to be a lens in everything we do. We need to, pay attention as much as climate change is an issue. I think probably the second biggest issue here and across the globe, frankly, is income inequality. And so I think that simply moving towards, for instance, having more jobs is not adequate. I think we need to think about people having flourishing in their lives and families and communities. And so we need to think about whole new systems that lead to flourishing and not simply, sort of a transactional notion of people having a job and frankly jobs that aren't providing income that afford, safe housing, good health, a great education, et cetera. Since I've come here, I've been sort of surprised because I was working on this piece, and as I started to dig in after the new year, I became elated when I started to track Statistics New Zealand focus on a well-being framework. And that's led to the government deciding to do the next year's budget with a focus on well-being. And what surprised me is when I've come here, there doesn't seem to be a lot of energy or attention focused on that. And I think hopefully that will change. But if you're not aware, if New Zealand pursues a well-being budget next year, which it plans to do, I believe New Zealand will be the first country in the world to do so. And I think it's a great example of the history that the country has of being a lab for social science and innovation. If you go back to the previous slide of we get the world we design, you as a country are beginning to say that you're designing your budget and your overall goal of what's important around flourishing, around balanced metrics for well-being. And that frankly changes everything about how you think about pursuing every aspect of what you're doing. I think for those of you who are researchers and academics, I just can't think of a more exciting time to be in the space, and especially the linkage between business and well-being, because I think there's so much we need to know and understand. So what a fantastic time to be in the space. So this is just the framework that was borrowed from the OECD. And one of the things I love about New Zealand is that you've taken this framework that was designed over many years with a great deal of care and research, and you're making it your own. The work being done here is both taking a te reo perspective as well as an intergenerational perspective, which I just think is incredibly important. In my paper, I put a strong focus on understanding and thinking about complexity. And one of the things that astonishes me is certainly in research, but even more broadly, we understand complexity fairly well. We understand human systems, and the whole field of healthcare and medicine is based on that. We understand natural systems, and in complexity, it's not a linear process. It's an adaptive and organic process. And what happens in that kind of a system is that you can't anticipate what the outcomes are going to be. So the reason in social science we've developed theories of change is we have to state explicitly what our assumptions are so we can then look and see what actually happens. But we tend to focus on the individual interventions and the institutions, the silos, the families, and we miss where the action is, which is the in-between. And we understand that. We have lots of research, fabulous research, and we actually have a good repertoire of practice in complexity, and then we design all of our systems as if it's a linear framework. And we scratch our heads, why are we not making more progress in the things we care about? So we need to step back and say, if we understand how complex systems work, we need to design our interventions accordingly. So I would say the move of the business school here is the very beginning of the most important work around being multidisciplinary and collaborative. It's why I've focused on networks of networks. There are two pieces, I think. We need to understand the connections, and then we need to figure out how, in that connectedness, we can learn how to work together, but as importantly, reflect together and adapt together. So we understand, somebody was telling me, I think it was Chloe's team, that they were looking at, if we're thinking of innovation, how can we put a spotlight on a particular problem? Let's say the first 1,000 days of a baby's life. And if you look at that, you can look at that and step back and think about how would you innovate. And probably you could come up with all sorts of hypotheses and labs to think about innovating to maximize, optimize the life of a baby in the first 1,000 days. But inevitably, you're going to get to, well, what was the health and well-being of the mother during pregnancy? What's the housing situation, of that child? What's the family situation? Do they have access to health care? And on and on and on, so that we know that even looking at something that seems as straightforward as the first 1,000 days of a newborn baby, we realize all the connections, and we have to start digging into those root connections. So we understand that, and yet we design our systems not to serve that at all. Just going to give you a moment to read this quote. I know it violates all the ethics of PowerPoint slides, but take a moment. I really love this researcher's thinking, which is, again, it's putting a challenge to individual social entrepreneurs, but it's the same for all institutions. I think every institution has to step back and think about, are we getting at the root of solving the problem, the root causes, or are we, chunking things in bite sizes that make us feel good so we can track deliverables, but we're actually not making substantial progress on the root problems. And I think that that's a challenge for all of us. My paper is very high level, really. It's broad themes, and people, of course, understandably ask, so what are very specific steps that we can take? And I'd say the first step is every institution can step back and ask itself, how are we organizing ourselves? And are we fundamentally looking at how we interface with other networks, other systems? And are we thinking about how we're structured to maximize that interconnectedness? So in my paper, I focused on 3 themes. Rather than look back, I wanted to more look forward, or what are some of the edges if we think about making better, faster, fair progress on social impact. So the first theme is networks of networks. I think we've begun to understand networks, and collaboration, of course, has happened, forever. But the difference is that we need to start creating bridges between the networks. So within academia, you have all sorts of networks, but you need to then say, what are the government networks? Or between housing and health, what are those networks, and how can you bridge those networks? Or between Auckland and the country overall, what are those networks of networks? Or between New Zealand and other countries, what are those networks of networks? So it seems overwhelming, so that quite a bit of choice has to be made about which are the networks that make the most sense. But we need to be thinking about how we're understanding ourselves in the ecosystem. And then one of the things we need to do is we need to save sacred space to do that work. Right now, we think of that work as important but not urgent, so we're not getting to it. So we need to think about how are we going to get to that work. We're not resourced for that work. And so for those of you here who are funders, we need to resource for the collaboration and the relationship and network building. One of the things that I've been talking about in the few weeks I've been here is that we need to think about being deeply human-centered in how we're working, but tech-enabled. And I think we have an opportunity. I think there's a bias here on the human-centered piece, to be honest, and we need to step in, I think, a little bit more actively on some of the tech-enabled opportunities. Technology is just exploding every day with tools that can help us to overcome a lot of the boundaries, particularly around time, because we certainly don't have time to do all that we want to do. And I just will give the example, many of us now are using video conferencing, and that's really more around space and place, but it's also about time. So that one of the things that's amazing is you can bring in a thinker, an expert, or even an investor right into your room, with no trouble at all. So that's just an example of video conferencing. But you can schedule your time. You can do your data analytics. So much of our work is enabled by technology, and I think we need to be thinking about how we can better leverage the tech tools that we have, and also create the space to learn how to use them better. I always give the example, I say that I have enough gray hair that, I come from an era where I am not tech savvy. And my kids will tell you I'm a slow adopter. And then I go figure, I went to work for a technology company. So it doesn't come easily to me, but I have learned to be an advocate because it really deeply makes a difference. It both makes a difference on time. It helps us to be much quicker in what we're able to do. And it also helps us in terms of access to solutions that we couldn't think about otherwise. At the Ready, the consultancy where I work, when we think about networks and we think about whole new ways to work that are much more decentralized, we think that we need a whole different set of rules or heuristics to think about how we define progress and how we're working together. So these are some of the guidelines that we use, and it's quite different than how we think about organizing our work. So for instance, progress over perfection. I think particularly in a research mode or thinking about government, we really need to know that we're nudging in the right direction. We're not, I think that we need to move away from grandiose goals and fool ourselves, that we're pushing to strive for goals that actually may not be the right goals as we learn. Small moves over big moves. We have this tendency to do grandiose programs, and really we need to do a lot more experimenting. So these types of roles and approaches, many of them come out of the agile software space, but also, a number of different methodologies. But I think we need to, all of us, ask the question, what do I need to unlearn so that I can learn new ways that will actually help us achieve our goals more expediently? Across the globe, localism is finding sort of a resurgence. And I've said I'm not sure this is quite as relevant in New Zealand, simply because for some of us, our national governments are significantly dysfunctional. And so localism it's a response to dysfunction. Whereas here things are much more stable, but that doesn't mean I don't think that you're not seeing a resurgence of localism, and I think the importance of localism. And it's local communities really taking things into their own hands with more sense of power and authority than ever before, and finding the solutions that are deeply contextual and looking at the resources that are uniquely theirs and solving those problems, including coming up with new approaches to investment that don't wait on the national government to hand out the dollars. I talk about globalism with a splash of localism with a splash of globalism, because again, technology allows us to really reach out and connect and collaborate with people all over the world. So I think thinking about what is deeply local, and then what other resources do you need to partner to help to realize that vision? And the final theme I have is the notion of recalibrating business. There is a strong energy, I think, in business, especially consumer-facing business, to respond basically to consumer demand, much of it driven by millennials, but not just millennials, saying we care a lot that business is paying more attention to doing the right thing, to being eco-friendly, et cetera. But the challenge is it's by choice. It's a nice to do, not a need to do. And there aren't guidelines right now that are distinguishing between marketing and deep and authentic business models that are serving social and environmental needs. So I do think we need to think about legal form and creating forms that both incent triple bottom line and also force organizations, businesses to be accountable for triple bottom line. I put that beautiful Allbirds shoe up because Allbirds is a B-certified corporation, so they have been designated by a third party, the B Lab, that has a mark similar to organics or fair trade to say that they've gone through a rigorous process to demonstrate their commitment and practices around triple bottom line. Berts Org is a startup from the Netherlands that's in the home health space that formed with teams of nurses that are accountable for the entire operation, budgeting, scheduling. They do everything. It's in teams of about 8 to 12. So they started out with one team of nurses that started it really to focus on quality and patient care and their own satisfaction as nurses and move away from what they felt was such a fixation on efficiency and the financial side. And they're now more than 10,000 nurses, and they are a model that has been adopted in 24 countries. So they went from one nursing group to expanding very rapidly, scaling very rapidly, all self-managed teams. They have a very small home office, I think about 50, and by every metric, they're the top home nursing operation in the Netherlands by quality, by their growth and business metrics, by employee satisfaction, and by patient satisfaction. And then the third picture is by a young man who, 15 years old, and he had a situation in his own family with cancer where he went off to his own homemade lab and solved a particular, very rare type of cancer. And I simply want to remind us that these days there's small barriers to entry. So we need to, when we're thinking of social impact, we do need to be thinking about the innovators across the globe and then think about how we can take some of these new tools and make sure that we're creating the structures that are the right structures so that we're not just inventing what could often be a social impact solution and then creating a business model where the profits are all going into, a handful of executives or shareholders. So those are a few of my remarks, but hopefully they've just prompted some thinking on your part. What we'd like to do is move into some table conversation and think. I would really push you, I definitely, I'm not an academic, but I sort of get into the geeky academic headspace. But I'd encourage you to think about practically in your work and practically thinking across differences and with the idea of complexity in mind. What are some things that have come up for you that would be next steps to do your work differently and why? Thank you.